Hello again, fifth grade, and welcome to lesson 7-2. Here we're going to focus on finding what we call common denominators. Now, this is something we've worked with before, and we're just going to review it here. So a common denominator, common means the same, and denominator is the bottom number in your fractions. So when you find a common denominator, you have two or more fractions that you're working with, and you want to make sure that you're making them equal sized pieces, right? Because our denominator tells us how many pieces there are. Let's go ahead and watch our video lesson and then go over our notes.
How can you find common denominators? Think about this question during the lesson. Tyrone partitioned a rectangle into thirds. Sally partitioned a rectangle of the same size into fourths. How could you partition a rectangle of the same size so that you see both thirds and fourths?
Let's find out!
This rectangle is partitioned into thirds and fourths. The rectangle is partitioned into 12 equal parts. Each part is 1/12. What fraction of the whole does one row represent?
Select your answer.
Okay, so here when they're talking about one row, that means one set across. So here we have 1, 2, 3 rows. So one row would be 1/3. So this is this entire top line. We have a top line, we have a middle line, we have a bottom line. So since there's 3 of them, the whole line would be 1 out of the 3 lines.
One row of the rectangle represents 1/3 of the whole. What fraction of the whole does one column represent?
Now here, if we're talking about columns, we're going up and down, right? There's how many columns standing over here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So one column represents 1/4 of the entire shape.
One column of the rectangle represents 1/4 of the whole. The fractions 1/3 and 1/4 can be renamed with equivalent fractions. 1/3 is equal to 4/12, and 1/4 is equal to 3/12. Fractions that have the same denominators, such as 4/12 and 3/12, are said to have common denominators. When you rename 1/3 with the denominator of 12, how do you know what number to write as the numerator?
Okay, so here this takes us back to when we were finding equivalent fractions. So how do you know that after you've decided that your common denominator is going to be 12, because 12 is a multiple that's shared by 3 and 4, how do you know what to do with your numerator? Well, you have to stop and think, what did I do to my denominator to get it to that number? So 3 times what number got me to 12? I have to do 3 times 4 to get to 12. So if I multiplied my denominator by 4, I have to do the exact same operation to my numerator to find an equivalent fraction. So if I multiplied the denominator by 4, here I need to multiply the numerator by 4. So that's what makes 4/12. The same goes for this fraction where we have 1/4. I have to think, how do I get from 4 to 12? 4 times what gets me to 12? Here I needed to do 4 times 3. So if I did the 4 times 3, then I also need to take my numerator 1 and do 1 times 3 to get the 3 for that numerator. Whatever operation you're doing to your denominator, you have to also do to your numerator in order to find an equivalent fraction.
One row of the rectangle is divided into 4 sections, or 4/12. So 4 is the numerator. Now you know how to find common denominators.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our notes and our guided practice here. So how can you find a common denominator? So common denominator means fractions that have the same denominator. Now, more importantly, what that means is you have fractions that are equal parts of the whole. So you can have fractions out of 9, out of 8, out of 15, whatever your denominator is. If it's the same in both of your fractions, then that means that they're cut into equal size pieces. They're equal parts of the whole. So how do you find a common denominator? We'll use the example from the video, the 1/3 and the 1/4. So first, take a look at the denominators that you have. You have a 3 as one denominator and a 4 as the other. Now we need to find a common multiple of those two denominators. So list your multiplication facts for each of those numbers, for 3 and for 4. Find out which number they have in common. So both of them have 12 as a multiple. Now 3, how do I get from 3 to 12? Well, I multiply it by 4. And how do I get from 4 to 12? Well, I multiplied it by 3. So after we figure out which one our common multiple is, right? That's what we're going to use as our denominator. Now, the way we got to that multiple tells us what we're going to do to our numerators. So if I needed to multiply my denominator of 3 times 4 to get it to 12, I also need to multiply the numerator of that fraction times 4. For the other one, I needed to multiply that denominator times 3 to get it to 12. So I need to multiply its numerator also times 3. So we're using the same operation for the numerator and the denominator of each one of those fractions. So now if I'm adding 1/3 plus 1/4, after I gave them a common denominator of 12, I changed them to equivalent fractions that have a common denominator. Now I can add them. 4/12 plus 3/12 is 7/12, right? When you have a common denominator, you just add the numerators and you leave the denominator alone. Let's take a look at our next example. Sue wants 1/2 of a rectangular pan of cornbread. Dina wants 1/3 of that same pan of cornbread. How should you cut the cornbread so that each girl gets the portion that she wants? So here, what's happening is we need to find a common denominator for these two fractions. So a common denominator for 1/2 and 1/3. So I know that both of them have a multiple of 6, right? 2 times 3 will give me 6, and 3 times 2 will give me 6. So I can multiply the numerators and the denominators by following that rule. So I'll do the 1 times 3 to give me the 3, and the 2 times 3 to give me the 6. So that gives me 3/6 is equal to 1/2. And for the 1/3, to make the 3 into a 6, I multiply by 2. So I multiply my numerator 1 times 2 to give me 2, and then the 3 times 2 to give me that 6. So 3/6 of the pan will go to Sue, and then 2/6 of the pan will go to Dina. Now our next example, this one is a little bit, it can be a little bit tricky. So I wanted to go through it and explain it to you guys carefully. And this is one of the questions in your book. So before you guys ask, this is definitely one of the questions that are going to come out of the homework, but I wanted to go through it carefully with you so that you understand what's being done. Now here it says Nelda bakes 2 kinds of pasta in pans. Each pan is the same size. Okay, so we have the top pan and the bottom pan, same size pans. One of them she cuts into 6 equal pieces. So those are those black lines. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares here. The other one she cuts into 8 equal pieces. So here we have 8 rectangles, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're looking at the black outline, 5, 6, 7, 8. Cool. How can the pans now be sliced so they have equal size pieces? Now, not equal shape pieces, equal size. That means equal fraction size pieces of the whole. If Nelda served, and the second part of our question is, if Nelda served 6 pieces from one pan so far, what fraction has she served? Okay, so this question has a little bit of work to do. So what do I know? I know I have one pan that's cut into 6 equal parts. I have another pan that's cut into 8 equal parts. Both of these pans are the same size. I need to cut it to make equivalent pieces, which means I need a common denominator. So to find the common denominator, I need to find a common multiple for 6 and 8 to make equivalent pieces. So I go through my 6 times tables, I go through my 8 times tables. What I find The first number I find that they have in common is the number 24. So that's what I'm going to go with. Now, how do I get from 6 to 24? Well, 6 times 4, 24. Okay. So the tray that has 6 pieces, each one of those pieces need to be cut into 4 pieces. So this is where the blue lines come in. You can see each one of these black squares is cut into 4 little blue squares. Now, how do I get from 8 to 24? Well, 8 times 3 is 24. All right, cool. That means each one of these 8 pieces, these black pieces, are going to be cut into 3 parts. So the top pan has 24 pieces. The bottom pan also has 24 pieces. Now, they don't look equivalent. We're not looking for an equivalent shape. We're looking for equivalent fractions, right? So we need our pans cut into the same number of equal size pieces, regardless of what shape those pieces end up being. So technically, this little rectangle in the bottom one is the same fraction of the whole as this little square in the top one. All right, so we found our common denominator. How many pieces does she need to cut them into? 24 pieces altogether. Now, the second part of our question says if she serves 6 pieces from one of the pans, how much has she served? So if she serves 6 out of the 24 pieces, that would be 1/4 of the pan, because we can simplify 6 and 24 because those are both, we can divide both of those. You can either start with even numbers, you can divide them both by 2 if you want to, if you're not sure. And it would be 3/12. And then 3/12 is also, 12 is a multiple of 3. You can divide that. That would give you 1/4. So if she served 6 pieces so far, she served 1/4 of the pan. Now let's take a look at some more examples. So find common denominators for the fractions for 1/3 and 4/5. So here we're going to look at the denominators and find the multiples of those denominators. So we have 3 and 5. So we list out our multiples of 3, we list out our multiples of 5. Find the first number they share that they have in common, which is 15. So the 1/3, in order for 3 to become 15, we multiply it by 5. So the 1/3, top and bottom, numerator and denominator, both get divided by 5. So 1/3 is equal to 5/15. Now for 5 to get to 15, we multiply by 3. So the 4/5, we're going to multiply numerator and denominator both by 3, which would give us 12/15. So those are our equivalent fractions with their common denominators. Now for 7/9 and 2/3. Now here, you don't need to change both numbers because 9 is a multiple of 3. So the 7/9 can stay the same because 9 times 1 is 9. But 3 times 3 is 9. So we're going to change the second fraction. So the 2/3, we're going to multiply numerator and denominator by 3. So you would have 7/9 and 6/9. The 7/9 is essentially just getting multiplied by 1, right? Because 9 is the first common multiple between them. Next, we have 3/8 and 9/20. So we list the factors for 8 and we list the factors for 20. And we find that their first common factor, or sorry, the first common multiple, we list the multiples for 8 and the multiples for 20. And the first common multiple they have is 40. So how do I get from 8 to 40? Well, I have to do 8 times 5. So that means that 3/8 both need to be multiplied. Numerator and denominator need to be multiplied by 5 to make a denominator of 40. 3 times 5 is 15, 8 times 5 is 40. So 3/5 will become 15/40. Now, how do I get from 20 to 40? 20 times 2 is going to give me 40. So that means I need to take the numerator and the denominator of that fraction and multiply them both by 2. So the 9 times 2 and the 20 times 2, which gives me 18/40. All right. Now here's my big disclaimer, which came from this question, this example question that they had in your book that can be a little bit misleading sometimes. Equivalent fractions don't always look equal in size or shape specifically. You need to look at the fractions and the numbers to decide if they're equal. This is 1/4 of this square. This is also 1/4 of the same size square. They are an equal part of the whole, even though they don't look the same. Just because the fractions are equivalent, that doesn't mean the shape of that section is going to be equivalent to the shape of the other section that represents the same part. So just keep that in the back of your head, because when you're drawing out some of these, they're not always going to look the way you want them to. Okay, let's take a look at our guided practice. How many 12ths are in each 1/3 section of Tyrone's rectangle? And how many 12ths are in each of 1/4 section of Sally's rectangle? So this goes back to this actually goes into the example that we saw in the video. So if we have 1/3 of a rectangle, now this rectangle was initially cut into 3 parts, right? And then we cut it into 12ths. So 3 times 4 is going to give me 12. That means each one of these 1/3 size sections is cut into 4 little pieces. So my 1/3 in 12ths is going to be 4/12 because I have to think, how do I get from 3 to 12 as my denominator? So I multiply by 4. If I multiply my denominator here by 4, my numerator must also be multiplied by 4. So that's how I got to 4/12. Now, if I have the same size rectangle cut into 1/4 pieces, so cut into 4 equal parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I need to make those into 12ths. Well, how do I get from 4 to 12? I multiply by 3. So 4 times 3 will give me the 12, and then I take the numerator of 1, I multiply that by 3, give me 3. So Tyrone's rectangle would have 4/12, and Sally's rectangle would have 3/12 in each one of their sections. Now for numbers 2 and 3, it says find a common denominator for each pair of fractions, 3/8 and 2/3. So I have to see, what do these have in common? So I list out my 8 multiples, I list out my 3 multiples, I figure out that they share 24. That's the first number that they share. So how do I get from 8 to 24? I multiply by 3. So my 3/8 to make a denominator of 24, I multiply by 3. So I also multiply the numerator times 3. 3 times 3 is 9, 8 times 3 is 24. Now, how do I get from 3 to 24? Well, 3 times 8. So that means I also need to multiply the numerator of that fraction by 8. So 2 times 8 is 16, and 3 times 8 is 24. So by giving them a common denominator, it becomes 9/24 and 16/24. Now for number 3, this is similar to the one that we talked about above. We have 1/6 and 4/3. Now 6 is already a multiple of 3, so I can get 3 up to 6. I don't necessarily need to change the 6. I can give both of them a denominator of 6. Now 3 times 2 is going to give me 6, so I just need to multiply the numerator and the denominator, both by 2 on that fraction. And my 1/6 can stay the same. So 4/3, if I want to give it a denominator of 6, becomes 8/6, right? I multiply both of them by 2. So 1/6 and 8/6. All right, that takes us to the end of this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.